right.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the January 2024 Ramsey-Washington Metro Watershed District Board meeting. Before we get started and do the approval of the agenda, somebody who played a big role in the board supporting both the community and some of the naturalist activities. I think her name is Kathy Trundle. She passed away just recently. So I just request maybe a few moments of silence to respect her before we get started. For those who hadn't received the email on it, please read it. She's contributed greatly. And if there is a celebration life coming on with that email too, if you have bandwidth to attend or have experienced or worked with her in the past. So let's get started with the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Moving forward to topic 3, the consent agenda. This is to be approved with one motion. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I still move to approve the consent agenda. Second.
Okay, any discussion or clarifying question?
There were a couple of projects. One that, as I'm opening up here, may not matter, but it involved a wetland, and I'm just, I guess, noticing that there was no discussion about what type of wetland in materials, and there's the WACA application that typically would have that kind of information. So
Was it for the Pioneer Park where the stormwater reuse?
it sounds, yes, sounds right.
You're wondering what type of wetlands?
Yeah, I'm wondering, because there's a comment made regarding water fluctuations because they're pulling water. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so it can't have, yeah.
more than a foot
Yeah.
reduction and or bounce. And I'm just, that number a foot kind of caught my eye, and it was like, well, what kind of wetland are we talking about? Because there's some variability depending upon, and I didn't see it.
Like management class?
Not management class, or is it kind of like a wet meadow, you know?
Yeah, I got you.
Or is it a shallow marsh, you know, cattails and things like that?
Nicole, do you have that information?
I'd have to pull up the delineation report because I don't recall, but just from being out there, I think it's a type 3 shallow marsh. That foot of bounce was reviewed and approved by Bowser.
Sure, thank you, Nicole. I'm just, is it typical to include or not include that information? I didn't see like a line or an item where it would typically, it's in the delineation report, but not necessarily in the application packet.
I haven't historically included that information when there's like a delineation done, for instance, but I certainly could try to remember that moving forward. Yeah, that's always reviewed during the boundary approval.
Yeah.
Which is a staff, staff and you know.
Okay, thanks. It's not an issue. I just thought I would raise it as a question.
And
Yeah.
my follow-up discussion on that was we'll talk about it as we plan through wetland management, I assume, in terms of this particular interesting 1-foot boundary change. It makes sense knowing that area well. Makes sense in my head. Many a soccer game at that place. Any further discussions? Okay, all in favor say aye. 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 Okay. Moving forward to visitor comments, I think we have.
I think Eric is here for.
Okay.
Is Eric with you?
That's where
He's here for Eric's here for the Granada permit,
Gotcha.
if you have any questions. Yeah.
Permits.
No visitor comments? Why don't we go ahead and move? Going once, going twice. So let's move to permit programs after you, Nicole.
Yeah, so first off, the Woodbury pavement rehabilitation project, Bielenberg and Curl Boulevard. This was not included on the consent agenda because there is a variance request for wetland buffer disturbance. I noted in the cover sheet that under existing conditions, the buffer is not met, and this is an in-kind replacement. So that's why staff was recommending approval. And any temporarily disturbed areas would be restored to existing conditions. The city was, I think, purposeful in not expanding the trail in this location and tipping it towards the road so that the slope down to the wetland would not be receiving direct runoff from impervious area. So yeah, if there's any questions.
On that topic where they, in the variance request, noted that they would engineer and construct the trail with slope toward or away from the wetland. Are there any stormwater collection points along this trail that would then discharge to that wetland?
Not in this location. There is a filtration basin that's proposed to treat impervious area both from the street, as I understand, and the sidewalk on Curl Boulevard. So a little bit towards the southeast, but there's just, really no space to provide a basin without further disturbing the wetland buffer. So that's why they are proposing to slope it towards the vegetated buffer on the west side. So there's a sidewalk and another vegetated buffer and then the road. So that was the reason for that.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate the effort to slope it toward the road. I think they did their best given the constraints. It wasn't clear to me that it was just a temporary, but it makes sense now. Just read the. Any further questions on this particular one? And I do have a question, Nicole. I really like how proactive they were in terms of trying to direct that water away from the wetland, specifically in this instance. Is that something that we typically see, or is that something that this particular builder found as a solution?
Yeah, the applicant is actually the city of Woodbury, so they own and maintain the street and the trail. But yeah, our rules would prohibit a direct discharge of impervious without any treatment. So that's part of the reason as well.
And that road, does it flood in heavy rain? Do we know?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't
So
recall.
this wouldn't cause any additional risk with their runoff amounts, I assume, but I was curious.
And there is an existing, sorry, I'm Kristen Seaman. I work for the city of Woodbury here just because they have a couple projects in front of me. So I thought I'd make an appearance in case there's any questions, but there's an additional stormwater pond that's in this location. So with the project in front of you, it's gonna go to the new filtration basin, then it goes to the stormwater pond, and there's plenty of storage and bounce capacity for that pond before it goes to the wetland, and the road is quite a bit above the wetland and kind of those other things.
I'm not familiar with this particular stretch of road. It looks like that holding pond that's in the south, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, closer to the Valley Creek.
Okay.
But I have no further questions. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Ben? Do we have a motion to approve permit 2403? So moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Moving forward to 2405.
Yeah, so the next permit is a 3M owned site currently. This is part of a Superfund cleanup plan to remove contaminated soil, both from the upland area on the site as well as a portion of the existing wetland, which is a DNR public water. So again, this was not included on consent agenda because there's a variance request for wetland and buffer disturbance. The very nature of the project is getting into that wetland and taking out the contaminated soils. So avoidance is really not feasible. And then the other wetland that doesn't appear on the map was a small sort of low point that was deemed incidental. So the plan is to clean up the site, and then 3M is looking to donate it to the city of Oakdale for a future public works facility. We've already done a preliminary review of that project, but you'll see that as a separate approval for that site plan. So this is involving no impervious surface for this sort of phase of the project. A lot of grading and excavation, some stockpiling of clean soils. And Eric from Bar Engineering worked on this project, so he's also here if there's questions about this one.
I just had one kind of general question that doesn't affect how I would approve this. But in your replacement of wetland soils, it says you're gonna be filling with general fill, overlaying with 6 to 12 inches of topsoil. I'm just curious if that's a general best practice, or if you typically look for more of a compost type materials, because those soils are typically wired, more anaerobic. Just out of curiosity.
That question's for Eric, if you're willing to or able to answer.
Yeah,
that.
you might know better.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. Eric on with Bar Engineering here on behalf of 3M. Yeah, so we worked with our wetland ecologists on, designing what needs to be done. And it's a combination of factors on providing the stability we need to sort of keep the embankment that's already there, and then provide the growth medium needed to support the vegetation establishment. And so the recommendations that we got were to use a general, existing silty fill, which is present on site, and then provide that organic layer above that to promote the vegetation. Excuse me.
Thank you.
I have a question, in the area of the public water, where there is going to be material excavated and to do the remediation, and then subsequently topsoils would be put back to meet grade. And I believe it also is proposed that the project would be done in the winter. And I'm curious what kind of precautions or actions that in other projects, I guess, outside this arena that I've seen, when done in the winter, if the top part that's pulled off is allowed to be stored for, a matter of days, it can freeze. And then when it's put back, you get big clods. And so there may not be a good control on that grade, that elevation grade. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of precautions or actions, since this is proposed to have some feature development with it, not within the wetland, but to maintain that elevation for a winter construction.
Yeah, it's a good question. We're choosing winter construction for a couple of reasons. One is to minimize the amount of free liquids that are present within the excavations themselves. Typically in a normal winter anyway, there's going to be lower water or some frozen soils that can be beneficial. The second reason is that doing a contaminated soil cleanup adjacent to a neighborhood, there's typically less odors and things like that. Fewer people outside to be, have sort of the nuisance conditions. And so there's some environmental factors that we're considering in the winter construction plan. As far as restoring the grade, you're right, that it can be a challenge, and then getting the vegetation to get us to establish that time of year can be a challenge too. So I think, we can do things like importing the soil so that it's not the topsoil, so that it's not frozen. We can, sort of break up the soils if they do freeze during that period, to try to get that grade to match as near as we can. You're correct that this area is outside of any future developments. There isn't the sort of foundational, slope stability concerns as much as there would be if you're coming in and doing the construction on top of that. So, breaking up the soils, using imported topsoil that's not frozen, and then, sort of doubling down on the erosion control and acknowledging there might be the need to come back and touch things up after it's thawed a little bit, I think are all part of the plan.
Yeah.
And I'll
thanks.
just add that, yeah, it's pretty common practice, especially even for the watershed district, to do pond and wetland cleanouts in the winter to sort of minimize disturbance to existing vegetation. And we'll obviously be inspecting the site through construction. So if there's concerns about the way that it was prepped prior to seeding, they'll hear about it. We'll be there to be looking at that as well.
Is seeding, I would assume, maybe it's not a correct assumption, but would happen in non-frozen conditions. So would that be a time that you could perhaps make any adjustments if there are issues with grade? That would be kind of, it sounds like, Eric, you'd already kind of alluded to that kind of a possibility, but just wondering if that might be a more active type implemented plan. Check that grade, make sure that it's met before seeding's done.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I think we need to get the site stabilized, before the 3M project is complete. I think there'll be a transition to the subsequent city project. So sort of like a permit handoff, if you will. But yeah, I mean, until the conditions are met that, we're satisfying all of the permit conditions, we'll need to make sure that we're coming back and doing any maintenance or repairs that are needed.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank
And we will be collecting on that note an escrow as well. And like Eric said, we wouldn't close the permit or allow the city to take it over in a substandard condition.
That's a question on just the permit boundary area. Maybe this is just my misunderstanding of it, but that wetland A, which is on the south portion of the Oakdale permit area, is the permit and the buffer, temporary buffer disturbance only for the north part of that wetland? Or if,
Correct.
as you guys dig through, you find other contaminants in the southern part, would you expand the permit? Out of curiosity. How do we know that the contamination's isolated just to the northern part of that wetland?
Yeah, so we've identified the areas that we are intending to excavate because of contamination through a series of multiple lines of evidence, I guess. Historical aerial photograph review is kind of the key part for this southern limit. It's a very shallow wetland, and so just sort of trying to envision how things were being dumped back when that was the more common practice. We don't have evidence that they dug out into the wetland to fill it with contaminated soil. Our cleanup plan that is through the MPCA is to, remove as much as we can, including sort of stepping out as needed. And so we designed that extent as what we think is going to be inclusive of it. But I think if we get to the end and say, hey, there's still contaminated soil here, the whole point of the project is to get that out of there. So I think there could be the potential that we would, step out until we get to clean.
Well, and that's was the root of my question was, does it behoove us to actually include the entire wetland itself in the permit request today? No, it doesn't.
I don't think it's necessary. No.
What would be the protocol if they come back and have to excavate past the permit?
I mean, they would just be allowed to, we would do staff,
It's staff approval, that's how we'd go. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with. what's
Nicole,
being
do you have
requested.
anything else to say about that? I mean, if the
Yeah.
extent of the,
But it would be
Yeah,
a,
so
be a variance request though, if they start disturbing deeper into the. Because it wouldn't fit within the acreage as indicated in the permit request.
I guess I'll let Nicole speak to that.
So, yeah, so the impacts to the wetland itself are being permitted by the DNR, but it's not like the whole part of the wetland within the parcel boundary is not going to be excavated. It's just the northern portion. So if they do find, this permit covers this parcel. So I guess if they find contamination off their property, that would be another consideration. It's my understanding 3M only owns this parcel and that they have a pretty good handle on where the contamination is located. And it's a state approved remediation plan. So the variance request would
Nicole,
cover.
Nicole, effectively the boundary, what I'm now understanding is actually the owner, the parcel boundary itself, and that's the reason why it's indicated in that way.
The yellow.
The
Yeah, the yellow.
permit covers the
Yeah.
yellow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's the parcel that.
That's the parcel, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
when you look at contaminants, we really just looked at the northern part of that particular wetland.
Well, we didn't, I
Oh,
mean.
forgive me, but the
So
ones.
the applicant or 3M looked at where the extent of the contamination occurred, and that's what's shown in, not in that map, but in the.
Yeah, I was trying to
Plan sheets.
correlate it with the plan sheet, forgive me.
Yeah, so the plan sheet
Yeah.
is just in like the upper right corner of that
Right.
wetland, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I'm very happy with the permit. I just want to make sure proactively if they find disturbance elsewhere, if they're digging and excavating, and they're like, oh man, I see something here.
Yeah, I don't think we would hold that anything up in
Okay,
that case.
that's
In
what I
that
wanted to
case,
double
we'd say
check.
yes, of course, keep removing
Yes,
the
exactly.
contamination.
I don't want
And-
our process to slow it down. This
No.
is important, so
No.
I just want to double check.
There's a note included in one of the plans that said they were gonna do an additional investigation and
Oh.
more material if needed, so I
Okay.
would assume that's all
That
covered.
would cover it, yeah.
And I'm super happy with that. I didn't see that
Yeah,
note. Thank you,
yeah.
Ben. All right. Any further discussion? Do I have a motion to approve the permit with special provisions and various requests, permit 2405?
So motioned.
Seconded.
All right, further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, Eric. Thanks, Kristen, for your assistance
Yeah.
with those questions.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
There-
Sarah?
All right, moving on to the enforcement action report. You'll see our sort of normal monthly summary. Couple interesting metrics. The permitting team completed over 400 active construction site inspections, close to 300 PMP maintenance inspections. Those are on permits that have closed and that for maintenance because the basins are required to be maintained in perpetuity. 31 permit applications that the board saw and approved this year, and about the same number of wetland applications. A lot of those being, delineations and no loss approvals. Another item, our intern that you saw a couple months ago present on her work, her last day was Friday. So she's moving on to the MPCA, but we really enjoyed having her and think she did a great job on inspections this year. Is there any comments or questions on the enforcement report? And then I can move on to sort of the end of year summary.
My only question is, are those numbers of permits, inspection, so forth, how do they compare with, past years? Is that?
Actually, on the next page, the permit program summary.
God, I remember it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll hold for that. Thank you. There.
Any other questions? Okay, the permit program summary is something that I provide every January for some of our newer board members. Just to provide some data about our permit program, and then I always include the previous 2 years, so you can look at, you know, trends. I also list some trends and observations that I was able to pull out from these numbers, and hopefully provide some context to what you're seeing. But I'd be happy to answer questions.
I noted that the number of violations seems to be notably higher compared with the 2 previous years. I'm curious if that's still the reality, or were there just, was it wetter, drier, right? You know, what's going on?
Yeah, so in the trends and observations, I did note that because that caught my eye as well. And then looking at some of the other metrics, like the number of non-compliant reports, which would be letter grade C through F, or the percent of inspections that were non-compliant versus compliant. I think what I was able to deduce, and in talking to Mary, our inspector who's here tonight as well, was that there were a lot more violations that maybe weren't considered like a non-compliant as a whole, but just some, you know, site maintenance that wasn't getting completed. To answer your question, it was a dry year, and I don't know if Mary, you want to weigh in if you noticed that there were lack of maintenance because people were getting comfortable that it was never raining, maybe caused some complacency. So I don't know if you want to comment on the violations.
Yeah, I think my strategy this year for giving violations was a bit different than I've done in past years, because I did notice a lot of complacency with not completing very mundane, typical action items. So it's nothing egregious where like they really needed a non-compliant report, I kind of thought, but it was enough to issue violations to hopefully get them moving again, because I didn't want that complacency to continue. Just the lack of rain, things were not being maintained, but that lack of maintenance wasn't necessarily causing issues because no rain, there was no sediment laden runoff. So kind of that balance of issuing violations, but on that same hand, there was not a ton of offsite impacts happening because the lack of rain.
So, in terms of class of violations and complacency, looking at some of the data, the install and maintain perimeter control, 40 violations. I mean, it would seem to me that's one of the issues with a lot of the construction sites, is just maintaining that perimeter control. And is that something that is probably you saw more frequent than in other years, or are there other types of specific violations that maybe were a little bit up?
I will say the perimeter control and the inlet protection are always the number 1 and 2 offenders, because it is very routine maintenance and frequent maintenance that's often needed. And like Mary alluded to, it just wasn't getting done in a timely manner this year in a lot of cases. I will say that the 5th most common, the inspections, is more of an admin that's also related to maintenance. The site contractors are required to inspect their own sites weekly. And so as Mary is out there and seeing the same section of silt fence down 2 inspections in a row, I think that was a more frequent request this year to like, hey, let's see your inspection log. Why is this getting missed? So that was a change, but I don't know, Mary, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, Nicole, perimeter control is always a top one just because there's so much of it. They have to get the perimeter of their whole site. So there's a lot of length of material they have to maintain. And it's not maybe that it's just missing, but maybe a little piece of silt fence is slouching or a biolog is starting to rip open, so it needs to be replaced. So it's not totally, extreme measures where their silt fence is missing or something like that, but the material or the product is just in bad shape where it needs to be fixed up and replaced, and just saw a lot of lack of that happening.
I was gonna comment on the 5th bullet point, the completed required inspections was kind of a surprise, frankly, so. I don't know if you can attribute their lack of self-inspection to just, the situation of it being dry. Is there a way for us to, in the future, to stress the importance of self-regulation? I assume you do. I'm not saying that you don't, forgive me, Nicole. That one's like, man, you got cited 18 times because you just didn't do self-inspection. That just is poor practice. It's a frustration.
Yeah, and it's required by the state and PDS permit. So it's not just a good faith effort, it's required. But we don't always have access to the personnel that we need or go into the trailers every time to look at all their paperwork. So we tend to look at it when we are noticing repeat items that are getting missed, or when we do see their inspections and when they self-inspect, everything's great and perfect. And then we go out and see it quite differently. So yeah, I think that was being checked more. It's interesting because it is a state requirement and it's not a new requirement. And the state actually requires that the inspector for the site, whether it's the superintendent or the consultant hired to do that specific task, they have to be trained in inspection. So it's not just like anyone can just self-inspect their sites. So I think, yeah, certainly with the lack of maintenance that we were observing, we were requesting to see their paperwork more, and we're finding deficiencies.
And with Nicole Peterson transitioning off and the great work she did, are there plans for another intern to come back around to help y'all out? It seems like that extra hand and coverage was helpful.
Yeah, we do have plans to have another BMP inspector intern next year. And then we're also playing with the idea of them also helping out with construction stormwater inspections, just to kind of help my workload as well as give them that experience. And that was some feedback that we heard from Nicole Peterson, that she thought that would be interesting to add to the internship to kind of learn some more topics, as well as kind of change up the workload in a week.
And we do have some like pretty large complex projects that are going on in the district that take a considerable amount of time to inspect and to follow up on and to write reports. So we're thinking that some of the smaller, maybe 1 to 2 acre sites that are, not as difficult would be a good jumping off point for a seasonal hire.
And I don't know if this matters, but I'm a strong advocate for doing the internships like you're doing. So I'm voicing strong support. Okay, that's it. I don't have any comments.
Yeah, it was great to have that many BMPs, like older BMPs, inspected as well for closed permits, because we do have these maintenance agreements that are, in perpetuity, but without the resources to check up on people, they lose a little bit of strength. So it's important to check those and to make sure that they're still functioning.
I don't have any questions. Awesome, thank you, Nicole. Any other questions for Nicole? Great report. Okay. Transitioning to Paige. Hope you're feeling better, Paige.
Yeah, I hope I make it through without coughing. Yes, so the Woodbury heated sidewalk application. I'll do a brief intro and then Kristen is there, can answer any other questions or provide any details, but you saw this back in August. City of Woodbury had sent kind of an informal request to us asking if we would offer funding for a heated sidewalk in an effort to reduce salt use at their Central Park Library. on the entrance sidewalk there. So this was approved last month for the permit. So you saw the BMPs that they're putting in through that. So this would be in addition to all of those that they're putting in. And in August, the board had a number of questions that the city was able to address. So such things as you'd asked about training, and the city staff do go through the smart salting trainings. A lot of their public works staff have already gone through that, and then they have some lined up for this year as well. They are proposing to use geothermal and solar as energy sources for the system. And then they do currently have a system at their city hall building that they're maintaining. So they're very familiar with the operations and maintenance needs of these systems. And then one thing I forgot to include in here is that the total cost of the project is about $230,000. And since this is in a priority area, water quality improvement projects are eligible for 100% coverage up to $100,000. So that's where that number comes in, but there's still a considerable cost that the city would be contributing to that as well. Any questions, or Kristen, do you want to add any other details?
That was a good summary. I'm trying to think if we missed anything. As Paige mentioned, we do have it at City Hall in Woodbury as well. And I think 2 years ago, we did our parking lot there where we added some additional stormwater BMPs with funding support from the watershed. And on our own, with our own funding, we also expanded that further to address some issues. I don't know how old our initial system is. It's pretty old. Worked really well, but we just noticed like it would melt the snow and then it would leave like puddles at the bottom. So we're like, well, we need to melt more in order to like really get the ice capacity away from the doors and decrease that salt use. So we're excited to have this kind of expanded system at Central Park. Again, it's something our city staff is really familiar maintaining and operating, and how our facilities management looks a little bit different once you have that heated component underneath the sidewalk. So we appreciate your consideration with this, and it is Central Park facility is a huge project for us, as you saw a little bit of that last month. And this, I think, is a good addition for that long-term kind of chloride reduction. We've also been fortunate enough to have some like kind of fluoride education already happen at Central Park, because it's the library and a active senior center, basically, that there's lots of foot traffic. So I could see that in the future too, partnering with either a Minnesota Water Steward or the Watershed District to further kind of educate and highlight that application and kind of smart salt use outside of that facility.
I'll open up for other questions.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
No, go.
Oh, yeah, I'll, as you may recall, my comments in August were not entirely supportive. I'll preface my remarks tonight by saying I'll vote yes on this, but I do it really reluctantly. I think there's I say reluctantly because the onus is on us, and I understand that today we don't have a metric of demonstrating a return on investment for taxpayer dollars. In the stewardship grant program, I strongly believe that we need to have a metric that will allow us in the future to say that for significant investments to the tune of $100,000, what percentage of chloride reduction do we expect in Battle Creek Lake? For $100,000, is it going to be a fraction of 1%? And if we were doing 100,000 of street sweeping, I'm confident from Bar's presentation that we all heard, we would get orders of magnitude of phosphorus reduction for similarly impaired waters. So again, I'll vote yes, but I do it reluctantly because I don't think this is a return on a taxpayer investment for this watershed district that has been quantified. Now, again, recognizing we don't have that measure today, so it's not a criticism of you or is it a criticism of staff, but I do think it's something we need in the future. I would suggest it would be interesting, and then looking more at Bar, if this is impaired and the work is going to be done, whether it's this winter or whatever, at a minimum, there should be a before and after. Take the chlorides in the Battle Creek and do it again next spring 2025. And I understand there's 1,000 variables, a strong winter, a weak winter. But since we have no idea what level of chloride reduction we're gonna get, my unscientific, but I think accurate assessment is, because we have no idea, we'll never know, but we're gonna spend $100,000 anyways.
Yeah, I think, a better way of measuring would probably be to get estimates from the city on what they've used previously and what they won't be using. The impact on the lake, you're right, will be incremental because it is just one parcel in a large sub-watershed, but it's also like, if we don't start somewhere, right? Like, maybe we can promote that for other places as well, or other, as a combination, because we do have some measures of reduction in use based on the training, the smart salting trainings. The cities do estimate, how much they've reduced their chloride use over time. So this would certainly be part of, I'm assuming, your TMDL or reporting.
Right,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, MS4
Yes.
reporting
Yep, definitely.
for chloride use, and there would be a reduction in that based on the changes, but you're right. Yeah, you're right. The actual impact on the lake itself would be small, wouldn't be measured in a monitoring program.
So I voiced similar concerns to Matt the last time this was brought up in terms of return on investment. So I wholeheartedly agree with what he said. When I did some research on other cities that have done this, they have claimed salt reductions. For example, like Holland, Michigan, and there's some in Duluth and Reykjavik. I'm curious and maybe would encourage. I would also vote yes on this just because of the benefits touted by those particular cities for the folks around them. But as far as it goes from a water standpoint, that's the return on investment that I'm concerned about. But yeah, we had the last August also asked about, is there a monitoring strategy to come forward as part of this permit or final stewardship grant? Is that something in the works per what we discussed earlier, or is that?
Not from a water quality monitoring standpoint, but I think from a chloride reduction, quantification of the use of salt, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pager.
Yeah, I don't think that like a plan or like program hasn't been like written or fully developed, I would say. I like the idea of it. I'm a scientific brain, so I'm like, oh, I want to know that too. I'm just not, I can't speak to the specifics of what the implementation of that type of plan or program would look like, just knowing the number of like players out in the like salt application world at that facility. If you're not familiar with the facility, there's two main entrances, the one on the east and one on the west. One's more a library and one's more Central Park, but it's all central in the middle with the internal kind of nature focused park space. So yeah, we'd have to work through what that looks like specifically and how we can kind of backdate some of the previous data, because I wouldn't want to like say this is the perfect example of a winter, we're living in it when it's been rainy most of the time, and then compare future salt applications to this. And I'm not sure how far back I could say with confidence what use we've used out there.
I mean, in truth, when I read this, the clear outcome for the stewardship grant is that improving impaired quality. There's a lot of secondary benefits to it, which is why I'm comfortable with it. But the claim or the outcome, I really still strongly question. And there could be a reverse of this. So let's say you do find chloride and this type of treatment in sidewalks has a good effect. Well, that's wonderful. And then we should have a different conversation about the amount of money we actually start allocating for these things around the city. But I'm aside with Matt in terms of skepticism.
And if I could add too, because I can totally respect and appreciate those responses. You guys are being good stewards of your funds. Like the city of Woodbury, I can speak to us, but I'm sure other communities are the same, where similar to our street sweeping efforts is that our public works staff have been pretty aggressive on incorporating brine and decreasing salt and not using salt and sand mixes, but only using salt, and the extent that everyone's been trained by PCA and how regularly they go up and retrain and learn new technologies and go to salt symposium. Like, it's a long list of activities that communities in the metro are pursuing along those regards. So I think it's a valuable thing to fund and to partner on for our different organizations as well, similar to what we've done and been doing with street sweeping and kind of the different BMP projects that we've been successful with too.
You know, if you'd like, I can comment next.
My, I guess, only question is, in the overview, there's the last sentence, comments, the design takes melt runoff into account as they do not eliminate one safety issue, create another area. I'm just, can you elaborate on what the thinking, you know, in terms of how you will approach it?
Yeah, so that's kind of like I alluded to at our city hall building where we were melting some and then finding the slip hazard just moved. And unfortunately at our city hall building, it moved to one of the pedestrian ramps. So that was a big issue. And then that meant our staff, facility staff had to go shovel that more, sweep it more, salt it more. So when we've looked at Central Park, instead of just doing like, oh, here's the budget we have, we'll heat these sidewalks because they're directly in front of the doors. We look to see what's the grade, where is that water, once it melts, gonna go and refreeze, because it's gonna go somewhere else and refreeze, of course. So that was more so the consideration is to what extent feasible can we do it that makes sense for the foot traffic that we know and have expected and will see increase as the facility increases, the facility of Central Park.
So it's more expanding the extent of the heated element and not necessarily a slope or directing that thawed water, you know, quickly into some kind of catchment or non-tread area. And that's not the direction.
Yeah, I can't say for sure if that's been done or not. From most of the project, as far as the parking lots, their replacement, they're not full reconstruction. So the grade specifically for the western parking lot doesn't change at all. We're like removing some stalls and changing the drive aisle, but that's likely wasn't enough to add catch basins, add drainage without expanding the scope of the project and then in turn expanding the scope of the water quality requirements we would have to meet both of our organization's requirements. So that was a little bit of a constraint on the project, is that that wasn't being done. And then along with that, on the eastern side, we are reconstructing the lot. That's where the geothermal is being added. And then we have an underground, I think it's a filtration basin. I've looked at a lot of variations of it, so I can't remember off the top of my head. And then a lot of pervious pavers are also being added. And similar to the paved drain that you have here, we don't add salt to that either because of the longevity of that BMP. So it's definitely like a campus-wide improvement that we have proposed and that we're moving forward with. That this is like an added technology to help specifically to chlorides and improving safety.
Oh,
Yeah, my line of thought, maybe not so much a question as perhaps direction to staff and how we might look at these in the future. But it kind of goes along with, okay, you're melting water here, you're creating a new problem here. You've done this in another area, which is just the sidewalk in front of one of your buildings. You're doing it here, which is just the sidewalk in front of the building. If we don't look at it on a sub-watershed basis, say we're reducing the chlorides here, I agree, you know, we have to start somewhere with chlorides because it is an issue. But if we look at this from a permitting perspective, and how do we take a site from maybe not no salt, but almost no salt, and how do we accommodate that with a large ask? You know, is there a way to look at these sites as, okay, you're committing to actually creating a low or no salt facility? It may not be all in phase one, it may be in future phases. So the permittees need to submit a phasing plan where, okay, we're gonna do the sidewalk in this part, and then upon our next construction of this parking lot or reconstruction or mill and overlay, whatever that next maintenance step would be, are they going to commit to putting more of this infrastructure in pedestrian aisles so that they can reduce salt from the parking lot to the sidewalk rather than so much patchwork? Oh, we're just gonna do this area that's the most heavily used to get salt out of this, you know, 5% of the site, rather than, you know, look at more holistically from a site concept review. like I said, probably not so much a question for you, but how the watershed approaches this type of installation.
How do we turn this into a learning opportunity?
Yeah, I like those comments a lot. I think that is useful to look more holistically at the whole site. And I think even if, you know, Kristen could probably write out even already what they're doing to reduce salt on that site. And like you said, maybe in different phases or as they're improving their operations, but I think that's good.
As you responded to one of the questions earlier, of what I started painting in my head is you're taking an approach where you're finding all the types of ways of reducing chloride. That's what I've gathered from the feedback. And so if, just to build on what Ben said, a storyline of, look, 2003, we did these types of things to get some marginal improvements, the sum total chloride goes down, I think would be beneficial because chloride is a problem. Combine that with a bunch of other issues, this would be a good learning opportunity. So is that, I don't know if that's something we ask staff to do or direct staff to do,
I mean, I
to
think
work
we
with Woodbury, or I'm not certain the process.
And then we can probably pull out some of that or work with Kristen to pull out some of that from their reporting, their MS4 reporting. We also could come back in a season, you know, and have some reporting. Ask Kristen to help, you know, kind of report on the impacts of this project, as well as any other salt reduction opportunities you've taken on that site. I think we definitely could do that.
Yeah, it's the opportunity of margins. If you attack the margins enough, you're gonna get a sizable reduction. I just don't know what it is for this. So we need to, any further discussion or questions? Do I have a motion, forgive me, I closed it, to approve the permit application 24-01 CS?
It's a grant application.
Shoot,
You're
I'm
good.
so sorry. Grant application. Thank you for the correction.
I will move that we approve the grant application, stewardship grant application for Woodbury Central Park.
Do I have a second?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Just
Okay.
so moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Yes, please come back and let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Budget status update. We effectively just covered it with that one approval.
Yeah, that puts us up for the year. Yeah, so started fresh with our new budget. I just have our maintenance grants on there that kind of carry over. So we closed out all the, what would have been 2019 maintenance grants. And then, yes, we still have 62 open for about $43,000. I'd expect more of those to come in this year. But otherwise, yeah, we have most of the materials updated for the 2024 program, and those will be on the website. I think Lauren is going to get them up today, if not early next week. So we're all set.
I'm excited to hear more about the street sweeping for sure, as that goes. Thanks, Paige.
Yes, thank you.
Any further questions for Paige? So let's transition to our, there's no action item updates this week, this month. Man, where's my brain? Long day. Tracy, the floor is yours.
Happy holidays, everyone. Happy New Year. What we worked on in the short time that we've had since our previous meeting was reviewing the contractor documents and making sure they have proper insurance for the Pioneer Park Stormwater project. I think there's an agreement that we're reviewing for Arlington Pond. I've just received the Fitzgerald CIP documents to review, which I hope to have done by tomorrow. And then we have the, more serious concern about John Sharkey and the permit in White Bear Lake for the Halo development. Work continues there. We're not sure that it's really the permit person that we granted the permit to doing the work. And so Nicole and I are communicating on that. I'm going to start to take maybe a little more serious action. I'm going to send the documents for a transfer of the permit. And if they don't really respond, what I'll probably come to the board with next month is whether we want to do a cease and desist. I think we've got enough evidence, Mary's kind of said too, that there are really workers there that are not the person we gave the permit to doing the work. And, you know, no harm, no foul if nothing goes wrong, but we sure are exposing ourselves if we know that they're not the person, they're the entity we permitted and they continue to do some work. So we're cooperating and coordinating with White Bear Lake as well. But I just want you to know that that might be escalating a little bit more this month. And I haven't really talked to Nicole, and Mary's been very active, and Tina, haven't really brought you into this as much as I'd like before we bring it to the board. But I want the board to have a heads up in case we come in with some serious steps next month.
Tracy, did you send out the communication just recently, or is it something in December?
No, it's been ongoing really since early November. You know, I happen to know in other areas that this John Sharkey has walked away from projects. So I have personal knowledge of that in a business sense, of course. And so when we've approached him, he's called me back once to say, I'm still doing the job, but he won't really talk to me. I don't even know if he called me back. He might have responded to an email once. The person who's supposedly now taking over won't sign the documents, or says Mr. Sharkey is still involved. So I just have some real concerns if they're being transparent. And we're kind of just escalating that a little bit more.
I can provide some background too if the board wishes. This is related to a residential subdivision in the city of White Bear Lake that was approved in 2021. So there's a developer, you know, to do the whole site. And it is not unheard of that the people actually building the houses are different from the developer that is taking care of the whole site. But we only have the developer on the permit. So we have some questions about, I think, like licensing and whether or not he's still able to complete the conditions of the permit. It's kind of half completed at this point. So that's what we're trying to suss out. And it's been frustrating communication wise. So yeah, we're working on trying to get some clear answers and maybe some additional documentation that this developer intends to finish the project as he says he's going to. So that's what's going on.
And just to help me refresh, John, this is a Stillwater developer that claimed bankruptcy recently or close to bankruptcy, is that correct?
I can't say what he's done officially, but I do know there are public records to show that he has not pursued some projects that he had started before.
There was a couple of publications when I was looking up.
Were they good? I haven't looked those up, just so I didn't want to go on public record if I didn't know.
Are there additional activities taking place beyond what was permitted as far as site work? Like I understand a lot of developers will come in and develop the site. If it's a home subdivision or commercial, you know, there may be individual lots that are then developed that would need to have a permit separate.
Right.
So is it the work still under that original permit? Just a different permit holder?
Yeah, the project hasn't changed, but you're right. If there's different builders coming in, we need to be able to enforce our erosion and sediment control. And so they would, if the developer doesn't want to be on the hook for their individual lot activities, then we do need separate permits for those lots. And that's part of the problem, I think, is we're sending inspection reports into the void, it seems like, and we just need to know who's building the lots, who's responsible for erosion control, be it on the whole development or individual lots, if that's how they choose to proceed. And then there's also the issue of the shared stormwater treatment for the entire site is a filtration basin that's sort of half completed. And I think some grading still needs to be done for swales and things like that. So yeah, it's a couple. I find that usually people don't want to go through all the rigmarole of doing individual permits with us, so the developer just stays on the hook throughout the project, but that's not true of all developers. And I think the real problem is just we don't know what's going on. So they need to tell us what's going on or prove, you know, what their plan is.
And who's responsible for.
Right.
Given the extra time for construction and the fact that a lot of folks like to construct during the winter in some of these instances, what prevents us from sending a cease and desist order now? I mean, why wait till February, first week of February? Out of curiosity, if we've been having issues since November, I don't know what the timeframes are, honestly, that set of precedents here. What makes us wait?
You know, Val, it's just really that it's cost of litigation, really. I've actually just talked to my assistants about getting those documents prepared today. I just wanted to make sure if the board is comfortable with that to escalate to that level, I'd like one more chance at them providing us with some transparency and opportunity to sign the requisite documents to do this right. So I cease and desist. We are really in some tight timelines, and when they need to respond, when we need to take action, when we need to bring it to the court so that it can be heard. So I think that really sends, sends us down a path that we're really hard to return from. So what I'd like to do is let them know, and I'm glad to have this conversation, let them know that that will be an option if we don't get some transparency and cooperation.
Yeah, I'm all for diplomacy on it, but it just seems since November and the fact that they are going to continue building, right?
Yeah, and
given the current weather.
I don't know, Mary, maybe you can speak to the conditions on the site. I think that was one thing. It wasn't,
Right.
there weren't any terrible violations that weren't being addressed. It was
Okay, so
some of that
sensible.
minor maintenance, if I'm not speaking on the term.
Yeah, see that exactly, Tina.
Yeah, I would say it, since kind of like Nicole said, it is kind of halfway done. They did all their mass grading and the site's been temporary stabilized for quite some time. So it really is just individual single family home lot construction. So nothing major is happening. Really, their non-compliance is coming from their lack of inspection records, lack of having a certified inspector on behalf of their site. And then there's some smaller things like they're lacking construction entrances and some proper perimeter control, but everything luckily is pretty well contained on their site because they do have their future infiltration basin as a temporary basin. So a lot of their runoff is going directly to that, thankfully.
Thank you, Tracy. Any further questions for Tracy?
No, I appreciate your input because we've, like I said, kind of no harm, no foul, but I think that we really run the risk that if something does go wrong, we're going to need immediate action. So I'd rather just keep pursuing it. And I appreciate the board's input on being pretty aggressive if we need to be.
It's coming off the, hey, you're required to inspect.
Yeah, well, and it, with spring around the corner too, we don't want to be in a position where it could be worse
Absolutely agree.
conditions.
Totally agree with the snow melting. Okay. Topic number 9 is board discussion topic. So in preparation for January, it's a fairly light packet. And just given what we heard at the Watershed Conference, I thought it'd be worthwhile just bringing up and for discussion, this concept of understanding our shoreline health. There is a paper published recently being in July. I just didn't know about it until the conference, frankly. I can send it to Tina and ask her if she's willing to send it out to the rest of y'all, but it was an evaluation of our shoreline health and a correlation between shoreline health and the actual quality of the water from an aquatic life and vegetation standpoint. And so through the discussions, I thought it would be good to see what you guys think about instructing staff or requesting staff to go and look at the mechanisms we've used in the past to understand shoreline health and potentially compare that to what the DNR has. There's a DNR piece to understand, especially as we consider impaired water bodies. We look at, we're an area that loves to fish, and we have lots of lake properties around that do fish. And so the shoreline health both helps promote healthy aquatic life, both flora and fauna. So what are your thoughts? Does that seem like a reasonable thing? I know we've invested a lot in shoreline restoration. There's a lot of benefit to that, let me be very clear. And so this seems like it's a priority for our organization itself. So I would love to see the information together. What are we doing to measure and understanding in our district uniquely that correlation? What are your thoughts?
I think that it's well stated, the shorelines are a critical element in, you know, maintaining that healthy aquatic system. And there's a lot of stress that goes on with shorelines. And just rolling it through my brain, some of the shorelines that we have in, you know, lakes within the district are probably not in the greatest of shape, just anecdotally. So I think it is worth considering and getting a little better handle on.
And I forgot to bring this up. So not this year, but maybe starting next year, there's a long process when we relook at the watershed management plan. And so you look at some of the adjacent watershed districts, and some of them are taking fairly dramatic stances on trying to return shoreline or portions of shoreline, even around residential properties, to something more natural. I'm not saying that we go that extreme, but and maybe it's we keep going the course that we are, but at least being informed for that discussion on this would be.
Yeah, just jump in real quick and say that what I told Val too is that we've done a lot of shoreline condition assessment. You know, we can compile that and share that with you so that you can understand where we've been, what we've done. We can also share with you maybe a compilation of the work that's already been done in the district. You know, we have miles and miles of shoreline restoration work that's been done. So I think we could share some information with you so you can kind of understand what we would consider the state of our shorelines today, and then talk about, yeah, like you said, how we continue in the future with those.
Yeah, I think,
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it would be good to see, but I'd also preface that with at the beginning of the study, I think it would also be more helpful from a water quality management standpoint to see how much of the contributing water is actually flowing through these shoreline restorations. We're a very urban watershed, so I have a feeling it's a low percentage compared to what's transferred to these water bodies through, you know, stormwater management conveyance systems, right? I mean, the shorelines, yeah, they're the most beautiful to look at. But just having a handle on this is important, but we've also got all this infrastructure just to put it in perspective of how this is actually flowing through the system.
Yeah, right. So we would think we'd be able to quantify, like Mark was saying, that how it contributes to healthy ecosystems, healthy lake systems. Maybe not as much of the filter buffering that occurs.
Yeah, we've spent many conversations over the course of even just this year looking at these impaired water bodies, filtration. So it seems like a nice theme to follow through. And I probably weird.
Oh no, my comments are duplicative. I support this.
So I don't, you know, we'd like to make a formal request for the staff to look at that. Maybe sometime in the spring might be a good target. We don't have to do it, I guess, February.
Yeah, I'll talk to Paul and Pat, who's online here, about when would be a good time for them to bring some information forward to you.
That'd be really great. And please read, the paper's only 30 pages, it's not enough to read. It has some really good nuggets in it as well.
Yeah, I will definitely share that.
So that's the board topic that I definitely wanted to discuss. Any further discussion points?
I had some ideas looking forward. I guess I hadn't brought this to Tina or anyone else, but I think we've come through a rather unique time with the pandemic, and in regard to looking at a screen and faces, you know, we see just an awful lot of use of virtual meetings, virtual working, e-commerce. And I think our world has changed fundamentally in terms of the way that in the past, we would have thought about driving and parking. And so just in terms of the whole impervious surface concept, I don't have a good handle. I'm sure bar staff and staff within the district may have better understanding than I do, but of the base standards, when somebody's designing a development, you know, designing if it be a hospital or a shopping area, brick and mortar, you know, this is the number of parking spaces that we would have. I mean, I'm sure there are standards out there. I did some online surfing and saw that, yeah, indeed, there is something. And I don't know how old they are. And I don't know the process by which it would be, you know, revised. We're not a body that would make those revisions, but yet I think it might be worth our time to explore that subject area, because we're looking at proposed projects nearly every month that have parking areas, and we're spending a significant amount of money in retrofits of past decisions about parking and trying to get ahead of the game. If our world has, our district has fundamentally changed, maybe we could look for opportunities in projects to reduce parking spaces
That's,
ahead of time.
yeah, that's definitely one of the things that we do, both through our targeted retrofits, but also through our stewardship grant program. Impervious surface reduction has always been one of the components of that program. I don't know, Paige, if you have any insights to this. It's a good thought, because all of the parking regulations are codified in the city's regulations, so they have their requirements for parking, but that has changed pretty dramatically, and we saw that when we've done the Target store retrofits. It used to be they would never give up any parking spots, but they were willing to give them up because parking has changed. The parking needs have changed, and they were able to even under the city codes. But Paige, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's a good summary. Yeah, we always try to promote it, especially when we're working with churches a lot more, and then those commercial sites like Target. We have worked closely with City of Maplewood and I think even Ramsey County with some of that, like with Aldrich Arena, trying to reduce impervious and either work with those, the city with whether we need a variance from their parking requirements, or I don't know that anybody has changed them based on ours, proposed projects, but they have been willing to give variances to those requirements that they have, even number of stalls and size of stalls. I think that's what we dealt with at Aldrich. Was they originally the either city or county had a larger parking lot size, and we were able to make that smaller, so they still had the same number of parking spaces, but we were able to take up a bunch of impervious there.
And just a note too, we've talked about with Capital Region and bar staff on the permit side, is there a way that we can quantify or incentivize impervious surface reduction in our rules that would make it more attractive to businesses? Obviously, like Tina said, the cities have their minimum parking requirements, but if we could explore that in a future rule change and what that might look like, we've talked about that.
That's very helpful. I'm thinking, not so much looking at what exists today in terms of the retrofits that is very successful, and I would certainly hope that we would be able to continue that. I'm just thinking of a little different tact, looking further out.
Like incentives for new.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think one of the issues with that is that most of our projects are already like they're coming back to redo a building or to redo
Sure. Yep.
an area. We don't have a lot of open land that's
Yeah, we're fully developed essentially,
right?
and so
But in the cases where we are, I think that's good.
There was a permit program that we approved that did reduce
Mhm.
impervious area
Mhm.
just today.
Yeah.
So are you requesting the staff to consider, or is it just for discussion as we approach new rule development?
I don't know if we're at a point of rule development. I think this is probably to help gain a better understanding of what may be out there. And so I think it would be helpful to have a presentation that would summarize some of that whole process and some of that thinking that goes into designing the projects that come before us. That's, I guess, where I'm at.
Maybe explain a little bit more what you would be looking for in that presentation, like what kinds of items would you want to make sure we hit on when we're presenting them?
I guess from what I've seen in my very cursory research, it's based on the number of people in a building. There's a formula multiplier of the number of spaces.
So you'd be interested in seeing what those are for our cities that have,
Yeah, and is it consistent across cities? Is there any variability?
Yeah, it's all.
And
we've compiled that before. We probably just need to make sure it's updated, but I think we can.
What might also be helpful is looking out at other communities across the country that maybe do it a little bit differently. That, you know, how have they approached that? And how have they come up with different standards, and how have they justified that? How does that work for them? At least gathering some of that information as well.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems ultimately, if this is something that we would have an interest in pursuing, it would probably be some sort of a rule change at some point in the future. But I think that we would need a better understanding of, you know, the basis before we pursue that.
I think we would need to see how incentives could work, because number of parking spaces is nothing that we can permit or control. We have no trigger to make a change through a rule on that. So if there's a unique incentive that's been implemented somewhere in the country where they've actually seen it lead to a reduction in impervious, that would be interesting. But as far as, I mean, having designed parking lots, like it's very hard to get a variance. Even with Aldrich, we had to work with the church across the way to, you know, horse trade and say, can we park here if we have overflow?
Yeah.
And that was the only way to get a variance with Maplewood. So I guess I would just want to see examples of how the watershed could actually influence that design, because just through the municipal code, we can't.
Well, and we could share too, we've had a few cost share applications that were solely for the purpose of impervious surface reduction, so we can share some of that information as well. And maybe look at how we could promote that differently or work through that process.
And you have to forgive me, Mark. I was skating toward what Ben was saying. It's like, how do we incentivize groups to consider impervious area reductions? You know, knowing the codes themselves, I'm sure it'd be lovely to learn about it, but that would be something that I'd spend time trying to Google and figure out. The incentives and maybe unique incentives to maybe encourage maybe a more permeable impervious area, those types of things might be an interesting point too.
I'd be interested too, you know, we've compiled a lot of data about our targeted retrofit projects, and I'd be curious how much impervious surface reduction has occurred through those projects, and maybe we can show the.
Well, I recall the Target
benefits
one that we
then
went
too.
to actually tour a little while ago. I mean, there's several parking spaces that they allow for us to, but there's a lot of benefit from water quality in terms of filtration.
So we can look at the successfulness through that avenue at least, through targeted retrofits, and then also through our stewardship grant program and kind of.
Interesting to see on the Target site, like what was their requirements? Were they already far over the requirements? Because Target has an incentive to not ever have a lack of parking. They don't want to turn customers away, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, we can share that. I know we've talked, Paige has that information as well.
I like that angle to address kind of the comment you've highlighted. That's not a bad idea. And then we can talk through some of the other constraints. There is some experience in the board and walk through it during that presentation, or maybe during a paper read or whatever it is. We could add that to the action log and figure it out from there. I want to go ahead and transition to the cost estimation from Ramsey-Washington, that presentation.
Yes.
Did you want to walk us through it, or do you just want to go straight to questions?
Well, I'll do a little bit of a setup, but this originated a couple months ago when there were a few questions about change orders coming through, and do we have enough funds reserved for that, and that kind of led to what's your approach in developing a cost estimate. I know you put contingency as a contingency for that, and so we got together internally and said we should really document the process we go through, and we have been going through for the past number of years, and use the CIP project maintenance and repairs effort as an example. So we tried to, highlight the different points that we go through as a part of that project, but just recognize that's similar on other projects for the districts as well, but they might have different contingencies and different, range of expected costs. So with that, I basically answer any questions about the memo or comment on any approaches you'd like to see.
And I'll be transparent, since I've been asking a lot of questions on contingency. That's definitely coming from a program management background. It's always something that I'm interested in. It could be a pet peeve, but not a pet peeve for you, but like a deep interest is what I meant to say.
Sure.
But the reason I asked those questions pertaining to this particular board was it seems like there's some opportunity loss that could come with overestimating per se, or having like a bid, what we saw recently with the excavation site, not saying that this is standard, I looked at the data, but like they were so much further down. I'm like, are there other CIP programs that we should have considered as part of this particular package this year? I didn't have an answer to it, but when I see something that comes lower than the engineer's best guess, that's what pops into my head.
Sure.
And the second thing that pops into my head is, well, man, we budget for one of those numbers, which I believe is the contingency number, right? It's the project.
We budget based on the opinion of cost, estimated opinion cost, which includes.
Thank you, that's the right way to say it. And so then I am curious, as we've debated on the levy, well, okay, we budgeted this much. I know Tina does her magic at the end of December, looking at all the new requests that's come through and whatever to try to reduce that levy. So those two reasons are why I keep poking at it. And just to clarify why I'm interested. So I'll leave it there. That was
just to comment on a piece of that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we've ever been limited on the number of maintenance items by the budget that's available or the funds that are available. And so we haven't been in that situation yet. Not saying it couldn't happen, but so far that hasn't been.
Because we've been able to cover all the programs effectively.
Yeah.
But as
So we don't take a budget number and say, how much can we get done with that number? We look at what needs to be done based on our inspections, and that's how much we have. We budget for what we would say is a typical year of maintenance.
Yeah.
And then if there is additional needs, then we would come to you and say, we need to find a way to cover these needs. But typically it's usually under what we would estimate.
When my head, and I know we're centered around the CIP, my head also went to the inspection. So when we see areas that need to be addressed, we plan the next fiscal year for those spends. I'm just trying to think through this amount that we plan for this, but it's really here. Could we address more, let's say, opportunities as opposed to hazards, if you will? That's kind of where my line of questions comes. It's in good spirit. I trust the job. I appreciate it. But that's what, just trying to be stewards of the money and thinking about the amount of work that we're looking at. Are there opportunities that we're missing? But for the CIP, sure.
And I think it does leave opportunity though. So if things do come up throughout the year, we would have that budget available to it. And then if we don't spend it, of course, it's not lost, it's carried over.
Yeah, it helps with the levy, which I appreciate.
So a question for you, Tina, was there any stress on the budget putting in that last section of the belt line that needs to be replaced, because that's really a repair and maintenance item as well?
Yeah.
Or was there plenty to do even a project of that size?
Well, there wasn't, we budgeted additional funds to be able to complete that, but we had the timing worked out such that it was in a budgeting session that we were able to do that for this year. In that case, if it would have popped up, let's say now, and we wanted to complete it now and not wait until the next year, yes, we would have extra funds probably available in that fund as well as contingency funds. CIP contingency fund separate from the maintenance.
I know there's other industries looking at trying to tighten financial targets, try to do more with less is what the feeling is, and so it's all in the spirit of that. What do y'all read the report? What do you guys think? More so, I'm interested in policy stuff, but not so much how you guys do it. I understand engineering judgment. But
I guess
this is
this is not an area that I've had a lot of exposure to. I understand that there's a great deal of variables, and it seems that FAR's ability to estimate is going to be based on kind of industry standards and expectations and past experience. And in the case of what we saw, I believe was it last month, where it was just tremendously low. That seems like there's somebody that is in a real niche or is really hungry. One of those two are a combination, and they're willing to come in with a real low bid. And I don't. It's going to happen occasionally, and I don't see a need to necessarily account for it. So
I'm really interested in, okay, let's say we budgeted for it, we got the bid after the budget, and now we're sitting with $200,000 and there's needs across our watershed district. What's our strategy for prioritizing the use of that money outside of, hey, we had something big come up, we're going to use the money there? That's kind of really what I wanted to see some of this to help drive that conversation. Right?
Say more about that. So
Yeah,
moving
yeah.
it into different.
I'm going to make up a hypothetical. If you don't.
Sure.
So let's say that we have a couple of BMPs or a street sweeping solution that's like, oh my goodness, we want to emphasize that, or we want to emphasize the BMP in this particular area, or add another one here.
Yep.
But in that hypothetical where we have an extra maybe 200 that we budgeted but wasn't allocated because of this low bid, could we repurpose that money in a discussion through the board toward another area that we think is beneficial?
Yes, the answer is yes to that. So
what's the process of
so that's like that budget transfer. So you saw one of those last month with this stormwater impact fund. So if we did have excess funds in one line item like the CIP maintenance and repair, and you wanted to move that into stewardship grant, for instance, like in your example, then that takes the action of the board through a resolution to transfer that.
What's the best opportunities what is our pathways to identify those opportunities? Is this per staff recommendation? Is that the best approach?
I think normally we would bring you those opportunities. Yeah, if we saw something where it'd be, a need that we had that we didn't have the budget for in that year, we would look at other ways of funding that, whether it be contingency or from other funds that might have access. Typically, especially this time of year, we just went through that budgeting, right? And we've identified the projects for the year, the priorities for the year, and have budgeted for that.
Yeah. And I know there's a line that was drawn on some of those. So I was like, oh, okay, we could actually do something that's important instead of nice to have. This is what I was thinking in my head. Not knowing you that nice to have can be branded. It's just one hand or the other is what I meant to do.
I think it falls more into that end of year, beginning of year budget discussion. I would not be comfortable moving contingencies to less on construction projects just to tighten our budgets. As we've seen, and I've seen on other projects, things do come up that are unforeseen, out of scope, like they've laid out here, and it's important to have that allocated and not trying to reallocate funds when you need them. And it seems like in the street sweeping example, Paige does a lot of outreach, talks to a lot of cities to identify what is this budget going to be. So I'm comfortable with the process that we've kind of got going.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm not per se saying allocate all the budget we have, but I know there are several long lists. Is the point that I'm driving.
Yeah, I
And so-
think, you know, I don't know that, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that we cut out, you know, for
Yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
I think we built our work program for next year probably to the max of what we could
Oh, yeah.
accomplish, you know, so it's not like there was something big that we said, oh, now we can't do this, right, because of our budget constraints. But if that were, like we've all been talking about, come up throughout the year, then I think.
And just from a trend standpoint, they are typically lower than what we estimate would be good for us. I just like, okay, this trend, it is a trend.
Yeah.
Do we more proactively acknowledge the trend? Assume certain things. So that's it. I'm very happy. I understand the budgeting processes. That's not what I was trying to dig into, but I was curious about the trend. Cool. Any further discussion?
Are there projects in mind that you'd like to see us allocating to? Is that is there something that you're like?
I was wondering if Tina was gonna ask that question, so I started digging through the list.
I'm just curious, like, it seemed like you had something that you'd like us to target, so.
No, I was thinking through some of the inspection programs, some of the other maintenance areas that we have in that laundry list of ones where there's the priority scheme, we highlight the top 7. As I went through them, I realized without having Nicole or Paige sitting next to me or Dave sitting, I wouldn't be able to judge correctly. And so I just think this gives an opportunity if we get a signal maybe mid-year or something like that, mid-build season. Hey, things are going on track, things look pretty good. Maybe there's a low-hanging fruit. Let's purposefully say, let's look at that list and consider it. That's really what I'm seeking. And I wouldn't have felt comfortable asking for that if I didn't know what the trend was shooting for.
So is that something that we'd be asking staff, like a
Sometime
mid-year
August or
report on
September.
how construction's gone? You know, is there another something that we could allocate funds to and still get accomplished?
I didn't think through the end of the conversation as well as I probably should have, but at the end, it would be somewhere like, okay, September is around. Is there something that's a low-hanging fruit that we can do? We're most of the way through some of the summer build season. That kind of thing is what I would look for. And it's really just a checking in. Hey, there's this opportunity, maybe asking staff to have the freedom to look, oh, we're way underspent in these areas. Here's an opportunity that really would have a big bang for the buck. I would love to see those sometime at the end of summer, maybe fall. That's what I would like to see, if possible.
I mean, I think you're getting into it depends on the type of project, of
Absolutely.
course, but if it's a construction type project, we wouldn't be able to do that in September and have it completed and, you know, typically at the end of the year.
Ignore my timing, but
Yeah.
the intent is
No, I
like,
think
as you
the
guys-
point is that we would always bring you any opportunities that we would see that would pop up throughout the year and, you know, have an opportunity to discuss how we would fund that if we needed to.
Yeah.
That is something we would do.
I also got a steam of passion for it as I read through some of the project scope stuff, specifically with the Owasso Basin work that we've had and ran into issues with in terms of the St. Paul water project. We're going to talk about that unfortunately later because I flagged it as a discussion topic. But yeah, that's the reason I got a bigger passion about it when I revisited it. So thank you for you gave me what I was hoping. Oh yeah, administration report.
Yeah, there's not a lot in here. Only a couple weeks between meeting and packet, and I had quite a few vacation days over the holidays, so I didn't include many items from the action log this month, but I do have things ready to go for the next one, and I'll probably send them actually to you ahead of time, so you have more time to review than just in the packet. And then I have a note in here about the Minnesota Watersheds, the legislative event, which is coming up. It is the same night as our board meeting, so I wanted to point that out. The schedule typically would include a reception, I think I say in that too, in the evening. I'm not sure exactly how that might overlap with our meeting, so whether you'd want to attend, if you want to change any timing for our meeting, I can look at, when I know the schedule better, I can bring that back to you probably at the February meeting and you can discuss. We could even just potentially push our meeting to 7 instead of 6:30. That might even be enough times.
Well, and don't we normally introduce new board members in March?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be our annual meeting and new
Where we
member.
reappoint and do voting.
If there is a lot of interest in attending that event and you wanted to even move the March meeting, we could do that as well. The 7th, so the 6th is the Wednesday, so that's when they typically have the reception and the presentations, and then the 7th is just an opportunity to meet with legislative members. There's no formal program. It's a time to schedule those if anyone's interested in meeting with their local legislative members as well. And we can talk more about that in February then.
Let's talk about it.
Okay. I'll have much more information at that point.
Because the agenda is what dictates.
Yeah. Then I have a couple new items that I will definitely add to the action log, as well as a few items that you'll see in February as well. So that will come up or be completed on there.
Excited about those.
That's all I got.
Any questions before that? You didn't get all this extra work done during the
Yeah.
holiday break? No.
Played a lot of games, movies, a lot of puzzling.
Let's jump to the project and program status report. You've already heard of one that I definitely want to talk about as we go through. We could start with A, B, and kind of go down the list. I was very happy to hear about the improvements on Phelan Village. That's great progress. It's wonderful. I'm very interested to understand, are we going to see things through permits, I assume?
Yep.
For C, given the updates on our vulnerability areas, they would be eligible, I believe, for 100% coverage for a stewardship grant.
Yeah, the projects that we're pursuing or looking at here would be our projects, so we would pay those already, not
Oh,
through stewardship
understood.
grant, but
Okay.
through flood
Thank you.
risk reduction. But there would be other opportunities. There are other opportunities in the subdivision that are not district-led projects, so.
Well, I mean, they were
good to
said,
keep in mind as well.
like, once designed, the district will likely see grant funding. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, that is like
Yeah.
100% grant funded, given the updates we did for,
Yeah.
which I'm for. I
Yeah, we'll
like-
definitely see grant funding.
Okay, item E.
Yes.
This has been something that's been ongoing for flood risk reduction. It was a passion of the prior board group and definitely one I think we carry forward. This has just been a roller coaster. Anybody have an update on, like, I'm curious about what the feedback from St. Paul Regional Water was and why they weren't willing to.
I can respond to, what's happening right now. With respect to St. Paul Water, we basically didn't get any support for looking at using the property in a realistic way. They just weren't interested in discussing it further. We can continue to offer up kind of our ideas and how they are going to impact their conduits that run through that property. But I think that's their biggest concern. They're just uncertain. They didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want to have to review what we were proposing. I think it's worth continuing to work with them, but at least at the point where we were at, we thought, let's keep things moving with North Star Estates, because it felt like they were supporting, we could continue to get something done this year. We could go back to St. Paul Water. And then we kind of got the stiff arm a month or so ago and said, no, don't even do your soil borings at this time. We need our engineer to review what you have planned. So we are currently in the process of getting, and there's been an email exchange here the last couple of days, getting a meeting set up with that engineer with that well. Yeah, I don't believe that has been secured yet, but we've sent some dates and times, their way. Even tomorrow and Friday were options, but we're waiting to hear back.
I mean, what I recall from all the different discussions we've had over time. This is a manufacturing home lot that definitely has many units that are under 100-year flood.
Yes.
I'm just, is the feedback one of cost, of impact to their own structures in terms of why they have engaged their own engineering firm?
I just think they're being cautious because it does impact properties that they are currently leasing out for, you know, have mobile homes on them, and they just want to be, they don't know us as well.
Yeah.
So they have confidence in their own engineers. They just want their own engineering advice. I think that will move forward. It's just, it was a last minute surprise that we ran into. I don't see that as being a permanent roadblock. I just think that they're just being extra cautious. I don't know, Dave, you came on camera. Do you have further comments?
No, I was just basically going to echo exactly what you said. I think it's going to happen. I think it's just got them off guard a little bit, and they want to do their due diligence internally. And it's not a local company; it's more of a national type thing. So they want to do their stuff. It's going to happen. It's just they want to do their homework.
Yeah.
There's some liability and concerns about, you know, what they're liable for too. So.
That helps. The last paragraph, first sentence really kind of made me panic a little. There's no emergency response plan, right? The city's going to work with them, but it just felt like we were, as you kind of alluded to, getting the hand, like, hey, no, we're not moving forward. There's a lot of benefit, so it sounds like once y'all work with that, we'll just keep it.
I believe that's true.
Well, and the local people.
Yeah,
that live there, or that, you know, manage the site, they're aware,
Yeah.
the city is aware. I think if a need occurred, it would get taken care of between them all. But yeah, when you get the upper echelons concerned, then we need to just take a few extra steps.
I understand. The response from St. Paul Regional Water was very surprising.
That was discouraging.
Yeah. Okay. Would you have projected it going different if we would include them in the planning earlier in the process, out of curiosity?
Probably not, because the process hadn't evolved to the point where we had a recommendation that they could react to, and they wanted something to react to.
Understand.
And they were aware, you know, clearly they're also a partner for the area up by West Vadnais Lake. So they were aware that we had been evaluating this whole area. It's not like it was a surprise to them, but.
I just wish I had better insight into why. Okay.
I mean, it's a pretty significant utility that they're managing. So I think they're again being cautious about use of their own property for other uses.
Yeah, this is definitely a passion area, knowing how heavily they were flooded back in 2016 in that particular area. So apologize about making a stink about it. That's just curious.
No, it's not a stink at all.
Okay. Any questions on anything down to I just wanted to say, Dave, it looks great. You misspelled Twin Lake, but outside of that, things looks great.
Misspelled Twin.
Yeah, whoever created it.
I take no credit for that.
Rain gauge data will be added later to the Power BI. You know.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, in the Power BI, is that
I
where
was
Twin
curious.
is? Yeah. Is that where Twin is?
Yeah, in Power BI user interface. It just felt.
Well,
yeah,
make sure we get that.
I clicked it multiple ways to get there, and I was like, oh yeah.
Okay. Take a look.
It's right on our site, but
yeah. Okay.
Don't give Laura. Awesome. No comments through till the adopted drain / communication report. You all have any other comments? The adopted drain, that's part of our action log, Tina. Is this the update for that? It's really encouraging, and they really pushed hard to get people to adopt drains at the water stewards. But
yeah, that would definitely be an update. It's an ongoing program, so we'll continue to update. But usually at the end of the year, we get the numbers from the adopted drain program. But I know the CAC is still in discussions too about
Okay, so that's a separate thing.
I would like to move back to M on the report, the arbor gas filter and the concrete issue.
Oh, yeah, I sorry, I
And so
flagged
we
it.
are still working through that. There will be a meeting with the contractor today. They're gonna discuss, how we're coming up with our recommendation based on the non-compliance with the specification. We reassured the contractor that, this isn't a ding on their reputation. They've done a great job. We're very pleased with what they've done, and it was just an oversight. So how these things work in each pour, there are concrete cylinders that are set aside. After 28 days, those get broken in the lab. That confirms whatever strength they're at, their 28-day strength. And I think there was an assumption that there was a different specification on the compressive strength than what we ultimately specified. So they threw the other cylinders, the leftover cylinders, only when we came back to say, well, these two don't meet specifications. So we are not concerned, BAR's not concerned about the overall strength of the structure. It can support, but we use the specification on compressive strength for the concrete as a surrogate for durability as well. And so that's why there was a higher standard there. So we can't confirm or otherwise that, the structure is going to be less durable. We just don't have the test results to be able to confirm that. So we said, based on what we can see, there's about a 97 to 98% compliance. So our recommendation that's come to the board, I think last month, was to just withhold that percentage off the total fee. And so, it's purely based on a non-compliance with the spec, and that was the basis we used. But it's really a board decision, whether you want to pay them in full or keep that retainage, or there are other ways that we wouldn't recommend. You can do destructive testing of the actual structure, but I don't think that's worth it. So it ultimately is your decision, but that's where we come down on our recommendation.
Is that one of those that'll come back as a formal presentation for a board motion?
We would probably bring it back if you said we think we want to go with the holding back of the retainage, it'd probably bring it back as a change order for the total price that would represent, how much the reduction was. So you just see it as a change order in the future.
I don't want to speak for my peers here, but I believe that was the direction we were comfortable. Yeah, that definitely would be. You're nodding as well.
Yeah, I believe that the discussion was, that was the path, and that the next step would be discuss it with the contractors, so they're not blindsided, and that discussion sounds like it's happened, so that would be where we'd want to go.
Back as a change order would be good.
And just as additional background, the contractor supplier also provided their own approach to how they would suggest calculating, and what in general they were averaging all the batches together and saying that average meets, but that's not how we would actually do it. We would do batch by batch, and the average within a batch is fine, but you can't necessarily just average across all of them. And so that's why we remained where we were at with the recommendation.
I think that's the most conservative.
All right, so next month we'll bring back a change order, and then we can release that retainage that's left after that. Little bit of retainage is withheld.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
On going to Lauren's communication outreach program.
Yeah.
She passed the FAA drone pilot.
She did.
Extremely excited.
So is she. A little nervous, but also excited.
Does the district have a drone?
Yes, she is. She hasn't, but purchased it already. It's in the works. I know I approved the purchase of it. So yeah, we're excited to be able to do some of that on our own. We have used some of our staff time, our staff skills in the past to do some of that, but she's looking forward to being able to do some
Yeah,
better.
just the amount of data and information
Yeah.
that'll be very useful.
Yeah, we're looking.
What I loved is when I read the first statement, and like having met and had conversations with her, I imagined it as an exclamation point.
Yeah. Yeah, she was pretty excited.
I don't have any further questions on the projects. Thank you so much for
Just an example of using a drone
Oh,
on
yeah.
a project site, the picture that's in there is hovering over the Mississippi River, looking at the belt line.
Yeah.
On that one, so, you know,
It's pretty cool
it's
On
it's
cue.
fun to actually.
and helpful, yeah.
Oh, I could tell you some horror stories. From a manager comment standpoint, I'm gonna just to tee up, if you do have discussion topics, especially at the early upfront part of the year, please feel free to let Tina know. That would be the best way. Or I believe one manager communication to another manager, just to list topics perfectly acceptable.
Yep.
So I work with Tina on the agenda. That's another way of doing it. So please let me know on that. One of the pieces that I think I'll highlight is potential other places where the board can show up from a public standpoint, which is why I'm interested also in the legislation place and some of the listening for the Waterfest in January. So maybe there's some way that we can coordinate. We're not all showing up at some of these events, even though I encourage it, but I know we're all busy. So, any other comments for next month's meeting? Anything there? Perfect. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
We adjourned.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Right, thanks. Thank you.